Morning, guys.
Hey, good
Hey, good
morning.
morning.
How are you? Welcome back.
Brad, good to see you. Good to see
Yeah,
you,
Brad
Eden.
Gottschall, the guest of the week. We'll do introductions here in a second.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Oh,
very good.
man.
Hopefully the weeks are going well. We record on Thursdays, so the majority of the
Mhm.
week is behind you.
It is. I
It's
know.
great.
It's hard to believe. It's almost Friday. Brad, you got like such a academic setup in your background. I mean, have you read all
Yeah,
those
I'm
books?
impressed.
Tell me that
Mm,
third book from the left on that
mm.
second shelf. Give me a Cliff's Notes synopsis of
Well,
that.
if he opens the book, he's got notes in it from when he read it.
Oh, I'm
That's right.
sure. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
I
yeah,
have a
yeah.
bad habit of reading multiple at a time, so
Oh, is
it
that
takes
right?
me it takes me forever to read one.
Do you mix genres? What are you into now?
No, all nonfiction, strictly nonfiction. I mostly do biographies or like historical fact
Yeah,
stuff like that. A lot of World War II
that's pretty
history,
cool.
but yeah.
You
Right now, I'm
Doris
trying to
Kearns
read
Goodwin?
a bio. I have a couple of hers. I'm in the process right now of trying to read a biography of each of the presidents. So
Okay,
I am on Lincoln.
very
Well,
cool.
William
Are you
Henry
going in order?
Yeah.
Harrison, well, that'll be a short
In
one.
order, yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a few short ones
Isn't he the
and
one he
a
caught
few.
pneumonia in the inauguration and
Yeah,
died like a month
exactly.
later from it because
Exactly.
he didn't want to wear a coat?
Exactly.
Wow.
That'll be a short read.
All right. Well, you know the drill. Welcome back. This is Generation on the Rise, where we sort of soft launch here in the beginning, kick a couple things around. My name's Eden Ratliff. I'm here with my other co-host, Dave Proboka. Unknown Brandon Ford. We hope he joins soon. He may be popping on. We're not really sure.
Brandon, where
We'll
are
go from
you?
there. Yeah. No, Brandon. Hello.
If you can hear us, come towards the light.
If everything's all right, hopefully he'll join and we'll go from there. But we once again have another guest. Last week was Jeffrey Stonehill. This week we have Brad Gottschall. Brad is recently on the free agent market, which we're gonna get into and talk about. Brad, it's so good to have you here. We're super happy that you've joined us here. We're going to talk about protecting yourself as a manager, what it looks like when seas get kind of rocky inside an organization, steps you can take, Brad. But before we get started, Brad, why don't you just take a minute to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, tell the listeners who you are, and we'll sort of jump into it.
Yeah, long time listener, first time caller. Now, I have had a chance to watch most of your episodes, and they're all phenomenal. Did not yet get a chance to see Jeffrey's. Tough act to follow behind Jeffrey
It is, but
Stonehill,
we have
but
confidence in you.
uh, but yeah, no, I've been in local government since before I became an adult. I started this long journey of local government when I was 17, as I began knocking on doors to become an elected official in my hometown of Frackville, Pennsylvania,
Oh,
in
that's right. I
Schuylkill
forgot
County.
you were an
Right.
elected official.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Wow.
made the jump from elected to professional management
Wait a second.
somewhere
Did you
along the
win the
way.
race at 17?
Yeah, I did. I did.
Did you really? Wow.
I did. Yep. So I ended up serving 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, as a counselor, and then kind of somewhere along the way there, I also ran for county-wide government in Schuylkill County for clerk of courts. I think I was 20, but I lost that one. But
Did you take
uh,
office as a 17-year-old?
no, so I was 18. I ended
Okay.
up yeah. But I was campaigning when I was 17.
That's pretty
I
cool.
had to actually I had to tell folks that if they were to elect me, I would indeed be old enough to take office when by the time swearing in comes around. It was
That's
a
pretty funny.
really yeah, it was a really neat experience. And of course it was a community that did not have a professional manager. It was a very kind of strong committee structure. I was chair of the solid waste committee and I was on personnel committee. So at 18, I was hiring and firing, was negotiating police contracts.
Wow.
So I got involved very young and got kind of an inside look at a very early age. And then I've been doing it
Wow.
ever since. I've been, a municipal manager now. I started in Montgomery County, a small borough of Red Hill, and then I went from there to Indiana Borough out in Western Pennsylvania, then to Millersville Borough, to Lower Paxton Township, and then
Following the great George
finally
Wolfe.
the Great George Wolf,
Shout out, yeah.
and then
So Lower Paxton's
finally,
outside of Harrisburg, for those who don't know.
that's right, yep.
Lower Paxton's sort of large. What's the population there?
Yeah, Lower Paxton is about 55,000 residents.
55,000.
Uh,
999 when I left.
Oh, I see.
Former
Yeah.
resident
Oh,
of
okay.
Lower
That's right.
Paxton.
That's right.
I moved out because of the stormwater fee.
How
Nothing
dramatic,
else,
Dave.
right?
You're so
That's right.
dramatic.
I am. That's true. I can't help myself. No, Lower Paxton's a great place. Yeah, great place.
It's a good community, very good community. Uh, and then, yeah, so I think it's actually the third largest, or might now be the second. I can't keep track, but either the second or the third largest township of the second class in Pennsylvania. And it's the 13th largest municipality, including cities and townships and the rest
Oh.
in Pennsylvania. So that was a unique opportunity. And then most previously, I was county administrator of Warren County down in Virginia. So it was my first time outside of Pennsylvania and my first time leading a county. I had worked in county government before, but never in executive management.
And Warren
Yeah.
County's in the Shenandoah Valley?
It is, yes. It's actually it's home of one of the entrances to the Shenandoah National Park.
What was the like? How big was the government there? How many employees? What was your budget? How many departments?
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually it was kind of strange, because it's very similar in a way to Lower Paxton. Lower Paxton, a township of the second class, had 53,000 residents. In Lower Paxton, we had 175 full-time employees. Warren County had about 40, I think about 48,000 residents, and $100 million budget, and we had about 400 employees.
I mean, that's the
So
Virginia way, right?
it is,
Because, I
yeah,
mean, the county is full service. They
Right.
provide a lot of services, whereas in Pennsylvania, there's two different sort of local governments, right? Three, if you include the schools, right? There's the municipality, which provides some services, the county, which provides other services, and then the school district, which is basically quasi-governmental.
yeah,
Whereas in Virginia, these independent counties and cities provide all those services.
Right.
yeah,
And so that's why you see larger teams and larger budgets, right? Because you
Pennsylvania.
that's right.
provided all the funding to your school.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because even though your tenure there was brief, but I'm sure you had enough time to really, kind of get into some of the department's operations. And I know what my
Yeah.
answer to this is, also having gone from municipal to county administration. What was your biggest like learning curve? What was for you the thing that you had to
Yeah.
spend the most bandwidth on trying to catch up?
Yeah. It was certainly, I would say, so two things, but most of which was a Department of Social Services. I had never had under my purview social services before in Pennsylvania. So we had a Department of Services in Warren County, and it was a very large, 60 some employees,
Yeah.
and everything from LIHEAP to SNAP and
Snap
all,
and
workforce development kind of stuff.
sure.
So all that stuff that took a considerable amount of my bandwidth, as you will, to get up to speed. But they have a great team, and they really uh, allowed me to spend as much time there and learn things. And it was a really good opportunity for me to see that kind of the shop. And then
So
we also had an airport.
that's cool.
Yeah, I am pursuing my private pilot's license, and have been for some time now. So I kind of know a bit about the industry, but I had never run an airport before. That
How
was
hard could
another
it
kind of
be?
new. Yeah.
The planes
So,
basically fly themselves these days. No, it's interesting.
It's serious business. When I was in one of my former municipalities, there was an airport authority, and it sort of matters. It impacts what's happening there, especially if you have a local university who uses it.
Mhm.
I will say one time I took off from that airport. I wasn't flying; I was a passenger on the plane. But once we were airborne, they announced at the airport that was part of an authority for the municipality that I served in that their only fuel pump was broken, and the repair part that they needed wasn't coming for a couple days. And so we were headed to Milwaukee. We had to stop in Cincinnati to fuel up because we didn't have enough jet fuel to get to Milwaukee. So,
That's
I
that's
so
love how they
reassuring.
waited for you to be in the air to tell you that
yeah, they
there
didn't tell
wasn't
you that when
enough
you're on the
gas.
ground.
We probably have enough to get to some major metro area. If
Right,
not,
right.
we'll push.
Yeah.
Uh,
So to sort of set the stage, so Brad Gottschall is a good friend of Dave and I's, and we're sort of doing the catch up thing here because we're all so busy we don't get to talk. But Brad is a municipal manager, as you've heard, sort of a Pennsylvania manager. So he's one of us, even though he has left the association and gone out of state, as Dave and I have done in the past. Brad, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but if you Google Brad Gottschall, you'll find that he's worked in some challenging municipalities. Last summer, Brad left his municipality of Lower Paxton. It was documented in the newspaper that he took a severance package, and that there were agreements in place, and he became a free agent. And we talked then about him potentially getting onto the Generation of the Rise podcast. He lands in Warren County, Virginia. You were there for 4 months, Brad, and now
Yep.
you're back in free agency. I also read in the newspaper that you accepted your severance package there in your contract and move on. And I'm sure that you're not happy about that. We'll sort of get into it as much as you want to sort of talk about it. But we also need to talk about what happens to the manager. One of the things that I found myself thinking and talking about in challenging situations is, this is our lives. We've talked about in different scenarios how the manager is sort of a guest of the community, right? These aren't our communities. They belong to the community. They belong to the elected officials who are elected to serve those communities. And they invite a guest, usually from out of town, to be the manager. And it's a distinct honor and privilege that we've all done. But it's not our community, but it is our life. Right? We uproot, we move, you both have children, you move your families, your spouses, these things matter. And so my question is, Brad, knowing that in 2 times in a year, you've sort of been tossed out of an organization, if I can say it like that, not to be too casual about it. But what were the conversations that you were having in the early days, to sort of understand what would happen to protect yourself if it did come where all of a sudden you were no longer employed there? They didn't want you to be employed there. Can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Eden. I think it comes kind of obviously in two buckets, as you've kind of explained. There's the personal, family side to all that, the discussions there. I unfortunately am divorced, so there's, the conversation going on with my ex-wife, and
Right.
how that works with the family. So what do we do to protect ourselves there? But then more importantly, I think for this podcast, obviously, is the discussion that goes on with your employer, your prospective employer. And I think it's something that I've unfortunately it's taken me a while to get to the point where I'm starting to get comfortable with that side of the shop because and I think probably as is the case with a lot of us, in Pennsylvania, most of us, it's catching up now. Obviously, tides have changed, but for most of, I think, a lot of Pennsylvania's history with regard to the management profession, a lot of us didn't have contracts, and we weren't kind of used to negotiating those contracts.
Right.
We do it for a living. We do collective bargaining, and I think we all kind of see ourselves as good negotiators. That's kind of what we're paid to do.
Right.
But for ourselves, I think it's a different animal. I don't like to talk about myself, and I think that's the case with most of us. We kind of operate behind the scenes. We're not really comfortable talking about ourselves or advocating for ourselves. But the past two places I've been, the past two jurisdictions, it's really been an unfortunate wake up call for me that conversation is the most important conversation is how to protect ourselves. I knew Warren County wasn't going to be probably a long-term stay. And actually, in retrospect, I kick myself now every day when I wake up in the morning that I actually took the job because it was a very, very difficult political dynamic. There was a very contentious election, so I took the job in September. I started. My first day, unfortunately, it might have been an ominous sign. I'm not sure, but it was September 11th. That was my first day. But so that was right in the midst of a contentious election, general election being in November,
Yeah, that's
and
so hard.
yeah, and most of the community knew that there was going to be a change in the board makeup. There was a very kind of tense hot button issue on the election, which was the funding of a library, and so that kind of riled people up in the community. So. Long story short, the politics of the community really made it very difficult. Again, in retrospect, I kind of knew it was going to be a really difficult operation for me. But uh, so I think to really long answer to your short question, I think having known that, I really should have done a better job in negotiating a contract that really shored up the severance even further with regard to potentially limiting potentially a an exit or allowing more protections for protecting my residency in Warren County, all that stuff. We could get into the mechanics of that, but
Well, let
it's a
me
really
ask you
important thing. Yeah.
about, because this was, I mean, we had Eden and I kind of butt heads a little bit over this issue on one of our last episodes where we were, and honestly, the more I think about that exchange, the more I understand your point, or at least I think I do, Eden, and the more I think I find myself not really certain of what the solution is. But I think the issue at hand was, as managers, do we feel that we need to be better represented? You talked, Brad, about our status as negotiators with collective bargaining agreements for the unions that we interact with. Those unions all have the backing of some larger organization. They're all, generally well funded. They've got counsel that specializes in that particular labor dynamic that they're a part of. But as managers, we're kind of on an island, and we understand that, we are part of professional consortiums. We have our networks, and we have a different expectation, I think, some of those public sector unions that we interact with. But how do you feel on that issue? Do you think we
Yeah.
are inadequately represented? And Eden, if I'm unfair in how I represented that
Yeah, I
disagreement,
think specifically
elaborate on.
the difference that I was drawing is I don't think that managers should be collectively bargained, right? Which would mean that we would be eligible under existing state and federal statutes that would need to be changed to allow for that. Like that, I don't agree with, but I do agree that managers at times wind up on an island by themselves, right? When you are negotiating that severance package, usually by yourself, when they say, hey, things are getting tense in the organization, did they start making weird moves? Maybe there's whatever the situation is where you're thinking that your employment might end, you're by yourself. Unless you pay for an attorney, which is inflaming in its own right. So I do think that representation, there's a opportunity there and there's a gap there. I think you and I just disagree in the early stages of our discussions on what that looks like and how to achieve it.
Yeah, and I mean, I see your point, and that was what I was thinking when I was kind of reflecting back on that exchange. Is that, I don't know that collective bargaining and that representation is the answer, but the only real leverage that is held by some of the representation of those unionized workforces is that they do have collective, strength in numbers, I guess, if you will, and that there's an understanding that an impasse is going to have broader implications than just one individual who might be involved in a grievance or whatever. And then, of course, there's arbitration and other proceedings that
Sure.
may kind of be the umbrella over that. But yeah, so maybe that's not the answer. I see your point. I understand your concern. I just don't know what the answer is, except that I
Yeah, I
feel
don't either.
that I've been kind of put on that island before, as I think we all three have.
All three of us have, and that island is lonely because
Yeah.
you feel like you're by yourself and you're like, well, do I ask for help? Do I get counsel involved? Do I just try to stand on my merits here?
Do I get
Do
a
I
volleyball and
trust?
paint a face on it? I mean,
Yeah. Do I trust that the governing body is going to treat me fairly? I think those are all really difficult questions to ask,
sure.
and it's a lonely, gut wrenching feeling early on. And so, Brad, you just went through this, and I want to hear all about it. But I also want to go back to the beginning days. So you were kicked out of Lower Paxton. I mean that's what the newspaper says, right? And you don't have to comment on that. I think there's agreements in place potentially. But we saw the meetings; they were highly contentious. There were vacancies on the board. The board couldn't agree that who was going to be on there. There was lots of fighting about the manager. And then you read in the paper, Brad Gottschall is no longer the manager of Lower Paxton, and we have mutually agreed to part ways, which to us tells us that they hopefully honored your severance agreement. So a few months later, you accept, I suppose, the offer to go to Warren County, Virginia, and to be their administrator. So is that when you start negotiating your contract? Is that when you start talking about the severance agreement? And if so, can you tell us about that? Are you using the recruiter? Is it just you? Like how does that happen?
Yeah, yeah. So a couple things. Actually, it's very interesting with Lower Paxton. With Lower Paxton, I did not have an employment agreement. I
Oh,
was
really?
totally at will. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Was that
but
by choice?
well, I guess kind of it was not. I guess now in retrospect, I mean, I would have preferred, my choice would have really been to have a contract, But
Yeah.
again, I got the job when I was, how old was I? Maybe 20, I think 26. Look, I just got offered this, again, one
Big
of the
wig
biggest
job. Yeah.
municipalities in Pennsylvania. I'm like, I'll really, take anything really. And George Wolf, my predecessor, had been there for 30 years. He didn't have a contract either. Kind of, par for the course. But so I didn't have a contract, and as the media reports and kind of it's become very public. Things were not going well. There was a massive distraction both for the staff and myself and for the board with my continued kind of existence there. And so I had approached the board actually about, hey, I want to resign, but and let's talk about how we can make that happen. And so we negotiated
It's a
then
gut
a
wrenching.
yeah, yeah. So I was able to negotiate with the board a severance from Lower Paxton. So that was actually really
Did you have help or was it just you?
just me. It was
No
just me. I
legal
didn't have
counsel, no
no, I didn't.
advisor from the state or national association, nothing.
Nope. I didn't. I did
No
not even.
mentor.
No, no, no
See, that's
mentor.
that I think is bad. That I don't like about our
Yeah,
profession.
yeah. It was, and I say that to not to suggest that of course, if I would have called any of my peers, if I would have called any either of you guys or any of our peers, any one of you would have been happy to help.
Of course.
But no, there's no standing kind of formal arrangement or formal structure to help us go through that process. But um, so and then Warren County had a recruitment firm, Colin Basinger. They did a great job. It was a great process. They put on a really good search and a really good process. Once again, the negotiation with Warren County was on my own. I didn't have any sort of kind of structure on my end to help with that process.
Mhm.
you know, Colin Basinger would assist, but of course
They're
they're
not helping
working
you?
for they were helping, but of course, they're working their client is the county,
Right.
not necessarily the candidate.
Candidate.
So there's always that, underlying dynamic there. But
Yeah, but sometimes the recruiter can be the really calm, reassuring, sort of neutral voice. I know they're not neutral to, in this case, the county board of supervisors, I assume,
yes,
to say, "Hey, like, these terms are normal. Like, this is a professional standard in local government as to what you should offer your manager."
yeah, that didn't happen. There was I had gone back and forth with the county, particularly about residency. There was not to get too far into the weeds. We can get as far as you want, but
Oh, we've already been in those weeds. We got to go
Yeah.
back to those weeds at some point. But yeah,
Yeah, eventually they'll come up. Maybe we'll have
yeah,
you back on, Brad, as a guest.
sure.
Well, I was going back and forth with Warren County about a residency requirement, and
So at this point, you've conditionally accepted the position? Like, they've conditionally
no,
offered it to you subject to
they,
terms,
they, they
or
yeah, so they had conditionally offered me the position.
okay.
I had taken about a week or so to kind of think about it. I talked to some peers, talked to a few recruiters because again, I knew how tense it was there, and my question to all these recruiters and some of these colleagues were, hey, really, should I take this job? What do you think about it?
Yeah.
It looks like a dumpster fire, from the outside. It's a really good opportunity, and I think Warren County is in a great place. But what do you think about it? And but so again, that took about a week or so, and I was negotiating with myself. But then when I returned to Warren County to say, okay, I'm interested in it, but I have these couple of points I'd like to further negotiate with regard to the contract. One, of course, being the residency thing. All that was done through the board chair with the board. The recruiter at that point had kind of left town. As far as they
Mhm.
were concerned, it was, they were watching, of course, and I was getting calls from the recruiter to kind of check in. How are things going? So they were from that end giving me support, kind of from a more personal or moral perspective, kind of just trying to champion what I was doing and kind of being there for moral support. But they were out of the negotiations. They were not in it at that point.
So you're
It was
negotiating
all
directly with the board.
directly with the board. Yes.
See, that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does bring up an interesting question about the role of the recruiter in the process of interacting with candidates. And I've been
Right.
a part of recruitments where I've been very impressed by the recruiter. They've been very honest with me about the community, about the
The
issues that were going
dynamic,
on, the
the board
dynamics.
dynamic. Yeah, they tell
Right.
you everything.
Even going so far in some cases as saying, you really might want to give this some consideration. I, of course, can't name names because they're they're still trying to fill that void. I guess the question is, how as a recruiter do you think that, and to all the recruiters that are listening, would be recruiters, how do you think your role is represented with both the candidate as well as the organization? I mean, I'm sure that's a tough spot for them to be in. And Brad, I'm sure you've had good and bad experiences with recruitment firms over the years too, but this particular one, you seem to think they've done a generally good job. Do you think they should have been more involved in the negotiation of the contract itself? And
Yeah, I mean, and this is just my personal take. I think that there should be a line. I I would not rely, just again, my personal take. I would not rely on going through allowing or allowing the recruiter to be involved in negotiations. Again, they
You would not.
you would
You
not.
want to negotiate directly with the board.
maybe not directly. It would be nice to have
Agent.
some sort of an
Intermediary.
agent or
Yeah.
something, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it were the recruiter, I don't know that I would be um, fully maybe trusting is the right word. Again, in the back of my mind, I would always be thinking, okay, I know who the client is here.
And
Um,
it's not you. It's not the manager.
so do they really have my interest in heart? I'm not sure.
There's
I
a
don't know.
recruiter who's now retired, regional to Pennsylvania, that we all know. And he used to say the same thing. He was like, in the interview process, when we're getting down to making a job offer, every board, right, every elected body and every manager wants the same thing. He's like, and the whole thing is a lie. He's like, but it's the same thing. The board wants the manager to say, I love you now and I will love you forever. And the manager wants the board to say, we love you now and we will love you forever. And together we will ride off into the sunset. But the reality is, it's not true, right? The average life expectancy of a manager in a
Yeah.
role in Pennsylvania is 4.5 years. We move around all the time. Sometimes that's because we're ladder climbing. Sometimes we're chasing certain issues. Sometimes elections happen, politics, any number of things that happen where managers move around. Theoretically, if that sentiment is true, that in the beginning, we all love each other, this is great, we're super excited about this new marriage, that's the time to start having the uncomfortable conversations. Like, okay, well, what happens if and when this goes sour? And my experience is, and Brad, I'm curious with you, but my experience is that even though that's the time, they're still leery. Even when you say, hey, you're going to love me, you're offering me this job, this is going to be great, I'm going to pick up my life and work here. If you say, okay, well, I want to talk about what the terms of employment are if things don't go well, where you want to terminate not for cause or something like that. These are sort of the boundaries that I'm looking for. I find that those conversations get a little sticky and get a little icky at times, right? That there's not a high degree of comfort where the elected bodies start thinking, well, maybe we do part ways. Do we really want to give 6 months salary and benefits? What is, and they start contemplating scenarios, where that becomes uncomfortable. And I will say, just because this is a public podcast. That is not my current situation. Here are my current employers. I mean, these are my thoughts over the course of my, career, which spans over a decade. I'm not representing anything that's happening here in Middletown. Just to be clear about that. But that's sort of the totality of my experience. Brad, I mean, and Dave, you've been in those situations too. I mean, in the early days, do you find that there's comfort around those conversations?
Gosh, no, I would, I haven't found that to be the case. And again, it's super difficult. I mean, we are just in I think, the most difficult industry as it relates to government. Local government, particularly, is the most difficult because it is the most amateur form of government. Governing bodies are not mostly full-time elected professionals in their field. They're mechanics, they're hairdressers, they're you name it, they're professors, whatever the case may be. And so their full-time focus is not on what we do or what our industry dictates, which is good and bad. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing with regard to what we're talking about today, which is negotiations of contracts for us managers. So I think it's very difficult to have those conversations, and it is uncomfortable because the hairdresser, the mechanic, the professor is they're looking at what we're asking for through their lens. And so when we're going to them, I think, and asking for, a $200,000 salary, a 6 month severance, all these
Right.
pretty lofty
The ability to go
requests.
to conferences and travel and
No.
Yeah,
maintain your credential, all that stuff. Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
seeing it. They're not seeing it on their end. And so I think there's that natural barrier right off the bat, that
Well,
you
and
have
and
to
that's
that you have to
where
work through.
that's where I think the recruiter can be of use to represent both parties, and that they ought to be going back to the municipality and saying, you know what he or she is asking for is reasonable. This is what you can expect for somebody of their tenure and expertise. I mean, one of the things I try to tell elected officials when I have the opportunity to talk about this is, not every community needs that 30-year manager. You have to be honest with what your price point is, just like when you're buying a car or anything really that is an investment of that magnitude. I mean, you need to be honest about what your price point is and what your expectations are for that individual, that candidate, to bring to the table. Because if those don't align, I think, Brad, you're exactly right. They're bringing their experiences to the table as whatever their primary roles are in their lives, and they don't necessarily see those salaries in what they do, or in people that they interact with on a regular basis. So it's hard for them to bridge that gap. And there's other power dynamics that are in play here too that are not evenly distributed, I think, between the prospective candidate and the municipality. And that sometimes this isn't true, of course, but you have a candidate for a job who maybe is in need of another place of employment. So they're going to really want to come and work for this community. The municipality, maybe they've got an interim in place, maybe they don't. They're doing fine, they're treading water, the bills are getting paid, the trains are on time. They've got the luxury of time to kind of wait you out in some cases as a
Yeah.
candidate. And that does tilt the scale a little bit in favor of the municipality. It puts us as candidates at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to advocating for ourselves.
Yeah, the best situation to be in when you're negotiating with a prospective employer is to be in a job that you like and aren't necessarily motivated to leave.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
When you're in free agency and between jobs, that's much harder. And I
Mhm.
think employers know that. And I think
Oh, for
recruiters know
sure.
that. Well, they say, well, like they're not employed right now. Like, you can probably get away with that because they're going to be motivated. Yeah. Which is challenging.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
like, if you stay there, you get your 6 month review, your annual review, that kind of stuff. You try to make up for things that maybe you couldn't get. And that becomes hard too, because then they're like, wow, we don't want to give like this major bump. And it's like, wow, we shouldn't have been here to begin with, and it's challenging. But back to the severance conversation. So, Brad, I mean, you took a severance from Warren County. So
Yeah,
at some point in time, that must have been in your contract. Did you get that? Was
yeah.
that a condition that you negotiated when you started?
It was, yeah, it
So I just
was.
want to get into the technical aspects of how that happened. So you said that the recruiter was still sort of left town and watching what was happening. It was between you and the board chair. So you, I guess, got on a call, sent an email saying, we're negotiating over residency. We're also negotiating over severance. This is what I'm looking for.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point there, Eden. At some point, and I forget when it was. I forget. It actually had to be before. I'm trying to remember now. Back to what that looked like. It had to be right before the county sent me the actual offer. But at some point in the timeline here, actually through the recruiter, the county had asked me for basically my list of demands.
Which is awful. I hate those
Y
moments.
Yeah, but not even this, not necessarily the salary, but any other kinda ancillary
Terms
things
and
to
conditions. Yeah.
include, yeah, and so as part of that, my one of my requests or demands really was severance. I explained it, given the little Paxton situation, so that was a non-negotiable. I needed a severance, and that was not something that was necessarily, part of the original contemplation of the county. Had negotiated up to it was I ended up negotiating a 6-month severance, which I later come to find that, at least one member of the board was not happy about, but that
And
was a
probably never
non
forgave you for.
exact actually, that's one board member that voted against my hiring. It
Yeah.
was
That's
I
tough.
was I was DOA,
There
but
was a previous employer that I worked for years. Really good, left on great terms, came on great terms, like total love fest, right? Like the exact situation you want to be in. And I at some point was like negotiating a new contract, and I literally said I was like it's all good. You're giving me everything. Like the market doesn't like you can't pay me more money because I'm like already sort of at the cap of what this particular market offers. Like it would be inappropriate for you to pay me more. I'm here. I was like, why don't we like pull, politics change. Why don't we bump the severance from 6 months to 12 months? Been here a number of years. Things are going well. And they were like, well, we don't like that. And I was like, why? Like, and they're like, well, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. Yeah, you've been here for years, but not like that long. And I was like, okay, like I'm not going to die on the hill. Like that's fine. But I also was like, are we contemplating a scenario where you may want to terminate me for a reason other than just cause? Like that's that, and I don't think they intend that. Like I don't like I'm sure your commissioner or your supervisor in Warren County wasn't thinking, well, maybe we want to get rid of him soon. And I'm thinking about, how my comfort level of that payout. But that's the way that's the way the manager takes it. It's like, well, if things are going really well and I'm asking for a strong severance, that really gives you pause about whether or not you're going to part ways with me for reasons other than cause. That means you must be contemplating getting rid of me for reasons other than cause. I mean, that's like an awkward feeling that, in my opinion, sticks with the manager. They never really forget that. And so, Dave, any thoughts on that? Like, any thoughts on like the idea of when boards are pushing back on a stronger severance? What that sort of means for you?
Yeah, I guess it is meaningful. I mean, we, by virtue of going through these experiences, become a little bit more keyed in on those. Probably red flags isn't the right way to describe it, but at least things that we put in the back of our mind that, okay, does this mean that they're thinking I'm going to be a short term candidate or a short term
Right.
manager, administrator, and that they're, kind of preparing or guarding their, basically hedging their bets just in the event that there's a turn in the political tide or they just feel like moving on. I definitely believe that in some cases managers are hired with the understanding that they're going to be short term. Whether it's something that's actually talked about or whether it's just in the back of the minds of the
You
board
sort of
members.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's an unfair spot. It's like we said before, it's an unfair spot for us to be in. We're people. I mean, we have lives. We have things that are important to us, and it's not just like it's one thing if we were professional athletes getting paid $100 million a year to move cities or whatever. I mean, there's a check you can write where you say, okay, I'll go along with that risk. But that's not. I mean, even though we're well compensated for sure, we're not at the point where like we can just live in these times of uncertainty where at a moment's notice we could be on the chopping block. There has to be a better way, right?
Yeah,
I
I,
don't.
I think it really
Yeah.
I think there really needs to be a lot more creativity in our negotiations. I think it just as you were asking the question, Eden, that makes me think, and I forget what community it was, and it might not be a necessarily a good example, but it was in Delaware. I think that one young manager of one of those beach towns,
Rehoboth Beach.
Rehoboth Beach.
Yeah.
But it was a really a creative negotiation on his end with regard to residency and the
Right.
housing. And I think it takes more creativity on our end in that way in terms of because you got to think about it from the perspective of the elected as well, is that if they're giving a candidate this what looks to be a golden parachute and just on paper, it looks like a lot of money. 6 months severance at, whatever, $200,000. That's a lot of money. Instead, I think we should start negotiating these things where it's okay, if I'm here 2 years, my severance is reduced by 15%.
Right.
4 years, it's reduced by 40%, whatever the case may be. In Rehoboth Beach, we did that with the housing allowance, with the housing loan.
Yeah, so the Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, the manager there negotiated. So I think they wanted a residency requirement. I think that was part
Mhm.
of it. With Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, great town, great beach town, great vacation area. It's a small town in the off months, and it blossoms to like 45,000, 50,000 during the summer. A lot of vacationers in the DMV area. Um, Negotiated a $750,000 zero interest
Forgivable
mortgage.
loan.
Yeah,
Forgivable.
forgivable loan for housing, that's forgivable after 7 years of service at 100%. Uh, Deeply
But it's
controversial, is also making a plus $200,000 a year salary, which I think is totally competitive for that market, but it is unheard of in Delaware. Like, no one that I know of in Delaware is making that type of salary. So it was a creative negotiation, and it's certainly created a lot of angst in that community. But
yeah,
Brad, your point's well taken.
yeah.
So let me ask you guys this question. We're sort of bopping around a bit. In the early days, when you're sort of negotiating the terms of employment, or maybe you're renegotiating in a contract, like, would you be willing to have an agent negotiate on your behalf? Like, would you be willing to say to your governing body, "Hey, hired this person, or asked this person to negotiate on my behalf, have those conversations with them. Like, would you be willing to allow that to happen?
What do you think, Brad?
I mean, I wouldn't. In all of my jurisdictions, I've not ever been displeased with my benefits, my salary, any structure regarding my employment. That's not been the issue for me.
That's
The
great.
issue has been other stuff. But so I have thoughts about protecting ourselves beyond the contract and negotiations. To answer that question, no, I would much prefer it totally be in my that I'd be in the driver's seat with it. But
Yeah,
Dave, what do you think?
I don't think I'd want an agent negotiating on my behalf, but I would certainly want or benefit from having legal representation review the contract. Once we've agreed to the terms, okay, how do we reduce that to writing in a way that preserves those terms and in a way that also preserves any due process provisions or kind of grievance arbitration, for lack of a better way to describe it, that may emerge from contract disputes. I mean, that's where I'd never felt as well versed in even when I negotiate with unions in how to kind of put that verbiage in the contract. And so, it leaves a lot to the imagination when it comes to actually having to invoke those provisions if there's not a clear process in place for how those disputes get resolved. So for me, it would be just a matter of, hey, look, we've negotiated with these terms of employment, salary, benefits. It's all good. Now, so and so help me, whether it's an agent, a counsel, or whatever, help me put this in writing or help me review the contract they've given and flag any areas that you feel need to be, strengthened in order to protect my rights as an employee.
yeah, it's almost like APMM, like an organization like APMM needs to have on retainer a law firm to help to help just do that. I think that would be beneficial.
Well, and that
So
was
how do
one of the
you
things I was trying to work in my term as president, was kind of reviving that managers in transition to, program that was more about, I think at the time you could get 1 or 2 hours of free legal counsel if you
Mhm.
found yourself on the, the losing end, so to speak, of an employment dispute. But I wanted to make it much more than that. I wanted to make it something that would managerial candidates who were members of APMM, of course, could avail themselves to help with those contract negotiations. Again, not about the terms per se, but about how we protect our interests, which are now kind of unrepresented.
How do you think your governing bodies would respond to that?
Well, I don't know where Dave's head is on that, but from my perspective, again, I wouldn't even be in my scenario. I would not. The governing body wouldn't even necessarily know that that was being utilized because again, that would be my own. I would use that service for merely taking. I would give that
Take some
attorney a
advice.
copy of
Gotcha.
yeah, and it wouldn't. I wouldn't be using that service in a way to negotiate on my behalf or anything with that end of it. But
Gotcha.
Dave, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think if the interests are are where they should be by that governing body, they should welcome it. I mean, even if they're aware of it or unaware of it, whatever it might be, I think it shows that the candidate is a professional manager, is interested in having a fair arrangement because it could cut both ways. Maybe there are provisions in that employment agreement that are, of more value to the candidate, and how do we kind of have an objective lens on that? I think that's where there's opportunity, but of course that's all going to depend on that municipality, that city, that borough, that township, that county. How they really respond is in some cases indicative of how that employment relationship is going to be after you take the office. I got a question for you both, if I could shift
Let's
gears.
hear it.
I want to talk about preservation of reputation. I
Mhm,
think this is a struggle for us, particularly if we're inhibited by an NDA, as I was, as Brad was, as
mhm.
you were, Eden. I mean, we've all kind of been in those situations where we've had to leave a community and we can't talk about the reasons. So from the outside looking in, it appears as though we just didn't like it. We left out, we're a short termer, we job jump, we do this, we do that, whatever the explanation may be in the court of public
Right.
opinion now becomes gospel. So how do you navigate that? It's not an
I
easy
have
thing to
no
do.
idea. I have not figured that out. And honestly, in the job search process, it's hard Because I think it's hard to get into the boardroom where you're finally being interviewed because sometimes they look at your resume, they look at your cover letter, there's a conversation with a recruiter, and you get labeled, as a liability. Yeah. It's like,
Right.
well, they are these things without any explanation. I don't even know how you deal with that. Hope for a good recruiter who you can tell the story to and they understand. And if they're a good local government recruiter, they know how the market is. They know how the industry can be. Brad, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to what Jeffrey said just yesterday on this or wherever. Yeah, his analogy of the fire suppression versus fire response or whatever, however he labeled it. I
Right.
think it really is a matter of building a brand and a reputation of our own throughout our career rather than in the midst of a crisis. Unfortunately, in Lower Paxton, the prevailing thought at the time from a majority of the board and kind of just our internal kind of communications efforts was to just be quiet. Don't say anything. Just let the fire burn. It'll exhaust itself without any oxygen, kind of a
Mhm.
thing. In retrospect, that was a horrible idea because I was the easy target. I'm the I'm a highly paid
Right.
person
Executive.
just sitting
Yeah.
up there. Yeah, and I'm not allowed to say anything, but I think and this is we gotta be a little careful, of course, but we gotta really create our own brands, and I think we've seen from time to time certain of our peers, they have websites, they have kind of their own social media brand, and there's a lot of value to that, and I think the more, I've been put into these just negative situations, the more I'm of that opinion that we should be doing those sorts of things. And again, we got to be careful as to not upstage our own governing bodies. But I think going into it, my next jurisdiction, I'm going to be very clear with them that I intend to do something to that effect. I intend to have my own social media brand. I intend to have my own maybe website to just continue to
Brand
project
yourself, market yourself.
positivity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's what this municipality is doing, all the good stuff rather than waiting until there's a crisis to then respond.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. I think, go ahead, Dave.
I just think we, as managers, and this is maybe a humble brag, but we don't often get the credit for the work that we do. I think that's probably not a non-controversial take on our profession, but we are intimately involved in almost everything that gets done. But the problem is when we haven't built the reputation just by virtue of our roles in the municipalities that we work for that reflect our accomplishments, it's very easy to be disparaged and it's very easy to be looked at as a hapless bureaucrat who sits in an ivory tower and barks orders at people but really doesn't get anything done. The truth is not there. The truth is we have a lot of involvement in the actual day-to-day operations as well as the strategic initiatives in the communities we serve, but the perception is very misaligned with that in many cases, not every.
This has been a great episode. We're at the hour, so we are going to wrap up. This is going to be a two-parter. There's so much to go into, and I think this is candid, vulnerable, real talk about what can happen or what does happen that we almost never get a glimpse into. In our next episode, Brad, with you, we want to talk about. So when did you know that it was falling apart? In Warren, and what did you do? How did it
Mhm.
feel? What were the conversations? What were the lessons learned? Because our colleagues are going to get into those situations, they can learn things from that, and so we certainly want to pick your brain on that. But before we end, Brad, we're all professionals here. We do this for a living. We certainly take it personal, but at the end of the day, it is business. I'm going to imagine. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm assuming there's no ill will towards Warren County, right?
No, no, yeah,
Yeah. Any
no
thoughts
will.
on that? Like, it's all good. It's all business. You respect their decisions, and you wish them well, right?
To a large part, yeah, to a large part, I think again, we serve at the complete pleasure of our governing body. They, it's their prerogative to have their own manager. Again, I was once in their shoes,
Yeah.
and I certainly want a manager that totally vibes with the governing body. I wish that politics would play less a role in local government than it
Sure.
does, unfortunately. But yeah, it's their prerogative, and I totally support it.
Yeah. Very good. Dave, any last thoughts?
I think Brad said it well. I mean, we have to be honest with the boards that we serve, and hopefully that honesty is reciprocated. Sometimes it's a no-fault divorce. Look, we're just not the right fit. Not every
Right.
leader is going to be right for every community. In other cases, it's not that. In other cases, it's just political. It's a function of a grievance that the governing body or a representation of them have with the manager, and it's a certain catalyst or whatever it might be that is the final straw that breaks that camel's back. And those are the situations that we need to work, I think, diligently to the degree we can to combat, and to make sure that we are having those honest conversations about fitness of role, but also not just becoming collateral damage every time the wind changes.
Okay, this is Generation on the Rise with my co-host Dave Traboka and our guest Brad Gottschall, who will be back for a part two. You know the drill. It's where we go there. You can download, like, and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.